What's going on today, guys? So finally we have some more decent winter weather that I can install the AirDog, which has taken me quite a long time. If you haven't watched the previous video, I went over everything about the AirDog and why I chose the AirDog. So before we get started, I just want to give a big shout out to 8 Lug Mafia. They have an awesome Instagram page and they also sell some clothes. So some people have been asking about the hat I've been wearing. It's from them. And they also sent me another hat and a t-shirt, and that's what we're going to be giving away, guys. If you haven't watched some of my other videos, I mentioned that at 5,000 subscribers we're going to be doing a giveaway. So I'm going to actually do two, and I have this hat and this t-shirt. T-shirt's an extra large, and this black on black 8 Lug Mafia hat. So 2 items, 2 giveaways at 5,000. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel, go like my Instagram page, and at 5,000 we're going to give this stuff away. More details to come. You can also find all of their stuff at 8lugmafia.com, so go check out the website. They got a lot of other t-shirts, sweatshirts. So let's get started with the install. First step, we're gonna be draining the fuel out of the fuel tank because we're gonna be installing a Beans diesel fuel sump. I'm not gonna try and make this extremely long, so I'm just gonna hit on the main points and some tips and tricks that might help you. Let's get started. So if you didn't notice, I have the truck up on ramps. It's just easier to get underneath here and work on the truck, especially if your truck's not lifted. So first step, like I mentioned, fuel sump, which gets installed right in between these 2 little indents. So I'm gonna drill that hole, let the fuel drain, then we're gonna get the AirDog set up on the brackets and mount that while we're waiting for all the fuel to drain. Alright, so while we're waiting to let the fuel drain, we're actually gonna get the AirDog set up and get it up on the brackets and get it ready to get thrown up. First thing, you're gonna need to install these. Another quick note that I want to throw in here, which I didn't even realize, which is something that they've changed, is, let me see if you guys can see this. Come on. Here we go. So these fittings are actually machine groove. They got O-rings in them now. They used to be pipe thread on these fittings, and what would end up happening is, you know, with these aluminum fittings and NPT thread and stuff like that, people would over tighten them, snap off stuff. I'm not gonna lie, it's happened to me before too as well. If you over tighten things and these fittings snap off, they snap off in here. I mean, pipe thread, you really just gotta know when enough is enough, and if you're an over tightener sometimes like myself, you end up hurting things. So these are actually really nice. The O-ring is meant to actually seal it. You don't need to go crazy with tightening these things. I think in the manual it says like 120 inch-pounds or 5 foot-pounds, something like that, but it's in the manual, so go check that out. So I'm gonna throw these fittings in here, and then I'm gonna start setting up the brackets and get that mounted up on the frame rail and see how high I can adjust it to get it up as far out of the way of eyesight as possible. So I'm gonna start doing that, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so I know now where I'm going to mount this. I know how high I can get that AirDog up before it hits the bottom of the cab. So that is actually placing this block, here we go, placing that block the second hole up. So that goes just like that. So we're going to mount that hardware, and then we're going to remount the AirDog to this bracket. Alright guys, and there you have it. Pump base and mount is all set. It's all secured. Fittings are in. Pump is mounted. Brackets mounted. Just got to bolt this to the frame, and then this part is done. Then we just got to worry about hooking up the lines to this, the wiring, and getting the fuel tank situated. So here's the final mounting of the fuel pump. I got the plates sandwiching the frame, holding the pump. You can see it's a little bit right before the start of the fuel tank. right in between the transfer case and the fuel tank, a little bit towards the back. So that's the final mounting of that. I don't know if you can see, but we're still draining fuel back there. We're actually just going to get a little wet and finish drilling that hole Like I mentioned before, the drill and my arm are probably going to get soaked, but that's the next step. I always drop the tank to modify the sending unit and to pull the stock pump. So we're going to do that and drop the fuel tank down now. Like I mentioned, if you're wearing a shirt or you're using a drill you really care about, you might want to second guess that. I'm a little impatient and I have an extra drill which I've used before, and that's my shitty one. So you can see, it gets full of fuel and so does your clothes and your arm. Alright, so as you guys can see, I ended up taking the drive shaft out, which is not a necessary step by any means, but as you can see, the exhaust, the fuel tank, and the drive shaft that runs right here, it doesn't really give you any room to actually get up there. If you're going to take your fuel tank down like I'm doing, and you'll see what I'm doing in a couple minutes here, but if you're going to do that, you have to disconnect the electrical connection and the stock fuel lines from the sending unit. And if you remove the drive shaft, which is only on 4 bolts, it takes about 2 seconds. So then it allows you to stick your whole body up there with needle nose pliers to actually get the fuel lines out a lot easier. Otherwise, you're really struggling between everything here to even get an arm up in there and see what the hell you're doing. So here's the stock sending unit. You can see I already disconnected the electrical connection. There's the stock return and supply line. So those have to be disconnected and then we can drop the tank down. Quick side note, I also forgot you gotta do your filler neck connections. Alright, so first reason why I always drop the tank is really just to inspect inside here. I do see, you can see a couple little things that I would like to clean up. Also from drilling, you can kind of see a little bit of all the plastic shavings. You can get most of that like from underneath, but it's easier to get from up top here. Alright, so here's your factory sending unit, and this is a little explanation of mostly why I dropped the tank. So in your factory sending unit, here's your stock fuel pump, here's your supply, and here's your return. Here's your return line. Basically comes back down right to here. So when you're using a sump and when you're using a aftermarket lift pump, what I do is I remove the stock fuel pump completely, obviously because you're not using this line as well. The return for the AirDog actually comes up through here. So all your stock sending unit is really doing, if you're using a sump and using an aftermarket lift pump, is really just being used for return and also to monitor your fuel level. I don't know if you'll be able to see in there because of the lighting, but there's some filters and some mesh, and also on the bottom here there's this screen. So what I do is I actually remove all that, I remove the screen, and then there's a cutout on the bottom here once I remove that screen that I basically cut completely out. So when your fuel is now returning from both of the ports on the top, they basically just come straight down. You don't really need any of this stuff in here, and also it is just extremely dirty in there. So that's why I like to remove that. I just want to make sure everything's as clean as possible before we start fresh with a new pump. Alright, so there you can see, here's the stock fuel pump assembly. Look at all that stuff right on the bottom of that thing. Yeah, I don't want that in the tank. Alright, so fast forward a little bit, you can see everything's out of the bottom there. It's all cleaned up, stock fuel pumps out. Like I said, all the sending unit now is going to be doing is reading the fuel level and returning fuel from your stock return and the AirDog return now. So I got the tank all cleaned up, got the filler hoses cleaned up, everything's cleaned up, the sump's ready to install. I'm gonna reinstall the sending unit here, and then we'll get the tank back up in the truck. Also going to not be using the blue hose that they give you. I actually bought almost identical stuff in black. Just looks a little cleaner in my opinion. Blue doesn't really go with anything on my truck, so a little bit cleaner thing that I do is I just use black hose. So what I'm gonna do actually is connect my fitting to my hose and actually connect this to the tank before I even put the tank back up in the truck. That way it's just already done, it's already easier, and all I gotta do is then connect that to the AirDog. Alright guys, it's been a minute since I talked to you guys. I'll give you an update here. Fuel tank is back in, fuel sump is in and tightened down. I have the fuel line going to the pump. all routed. And excuse the lighting, we are losing daylight very fast here, so apologize for that. Okay, so you can kind of see we got the harness started to be run. Got the fuel lines for the return and the supply going to the AirDog done. Here's what they look like at the moment. You can see going to the AirDog from the tank. Fuel returns in the front and routes around back, and then there's just one line left going to the front. So I started running the harness. That's all connected to the factory tank hookup. So what's left is really just to install that one line going to the CP3, install the CP3 fitting, and finish running the wiring. Another thing I want to mention, guys, because somebody asked this, I do always remove my factory feed line going to the CP3. Obviously that's being replaced, so it's not being used. It's just in the way it kind of holds fuel if it's there. You can leave it, it doesn't really make a difference if it's there, but I always just remove it. Alright, so I started doing some of the AirDog wiring. You can see I have the relay over there in the corner. I actually just got to shorten up these, hook these up to the positive and negative, and then really the last step is to hook up the last fuel supply line to the CP3. So I have to undo the stock supply line, and like I said before, I'm removing that completely. The other thing that I'm removing completely, seeing that we don't need, is that rusty crusty fuel filter housing. So I have a fuel filter housing delete plate, and we are going to be deleting that. Basically all that's doing is getting rid of this line and also the rest of the factory line, which is in the back here. The factory return actually runs through this section, so you got to undo some of this stuff, and then the delete plate bolts right here, but the delete plate still utilizes a passage for the factory return line. So got to put that in, and then we should be almost pretty buttoned up. While I'm in here, my last video we did the light bar install, so I might try and wrap up the wiring as well for that. Alright, so just to give you guys a little bit of a closer look, if you are going to take off your fuel filter housing, this might help you if you haven't done it before. These are the two bolts that actually just hold it to the head assembly. But what you're going to have to do first is this right here, that line you can see that I just cut, which is easier. You can see how crusted this is, so these quick connect clips, don't work as smoothly as they usually would. So you can just cut it if you're going to remove the stock supply line. What you're going to have to do is either cut that and then take this banjo bolt off, or leave it. But the return line, the hard return line in the back there, you're gonna have to undo that banjo bolt. And then you can see this is the supply line going to the CP3. You can either cut that if it's not coming off. And then also right down there, you can see this is the other return, and the factory return, passes through this block. So if you are going to take this off, I highly recommend getting everything off of this before you undo these bolts. Otherwise this thing's wobbling around and it's going to make it extremely hard to undo these banjo bolts. And then this is the delete block. You can see it's just a passage, straight passage through. All you got to do is just hook up this banjo and then the banjo on the back side right to this, and it bolts in the same location, and now it's just used for return purposes, nothing to do with obviously the supply or the filter. That's all taken care of with the AirDog. Alright, here's just a quick shot of the fuel filter delete installed, and I got all the banjo fittings back in. You can see there's the hard line and the return off of the CP3 going into the one side, and then in the back the one off the head going down to the factory line down below there. Kind of hard to tell, but so much more room now. I have the new fitting in for the CP3. We are just getting ready to make that last line, hook that up, and we're almost done. So you might have seen before in some of my other videos that my fuel pressure gauge wasn't working. I was really waiting. All the wiring is there, the sensor's there. I'm just basically waiting to hook up this T in line of this main supply line, and I got it marked, so we're just gonna put that right in the middle there, hook up that gauge, and then I will actually have an accurate fuel pressure reading. Another thing you might not want to forget about is the fact that you drained all your fuel out of your truck. And if you're doing this by yourself and you don't have another vehicle, you're going to need to get some fuel. So one last thing I do right before I hook everything up for the final time and do all the electrical connections for the final time, just to kind of test the pump. And also this kind of is a little more relevant too if you're doing stainless braided lines, that sometimes when you cut those lines there's residue left in there that you try and clean out the best you can. I just do a test bump and get the fuel system primed, and that way it flushes out anything that's in any of the lines that we cut or anything that might be left over in that first little bit of fuel coming out. So before it hits the CP3, I always just put the fuel line in a bucket, test bump it one time, and that way that ensures like anything, you know, like I said, residue, anything that was cut, you know, just comes out here before it goes right to the motor. All right, guys, everything is done and complete. I just wanted to give you guys one last look of everything completed, done. I did actually have to adjust the fuel pressure. My fuel pressure gauge goes up to 30. It was actually reading way above that, so I dialed that down. Another great thing about AirDog, very easy to dial in exactly what PSI you want. So quick adjustment, took about 2 seconds, that's done. One of the only other things I want to mention, guys, as well, on a 6.7 truck, and especially 4th gens, if you're deleting the fuel supply line and the factory fuel filter, you will need to take your water in fuel sensor on the bottom of that assembly and still plug it back into your harness and then zip tie that out of the way. If you don't do that, you'll get a check engine light and your water and fuel light will go in. So before you chuck that fuel filter assembly, make sure you take that sensor out, plug it back in before you button everything up. We also got all the wiring done, and we got all the wiring completed for the light bar, which was not completed in the last install video, so you can kind of see all of the wiring is nice, neat, everything's hooked up, loomed, looks good, and is ready to go. Hopefully there was one thing maybe in this video that helped you out. Maybe you learned from the whole thing, but I really wanted to try and find a balance of me actually getting the project done in a timely manner, videoing for you guys, and just showing you the main points. So as always, thank you so much for watching, guys. New videos coming very shortly. Thank you so much for all the subscribers. We are getting close to 5,000, which means we'll be doing the giveaway. Thanks again, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.